This is Aaron Nordstrom from Gemini Syndrome and Woyote and Nu Skool, and you're listening to the Nothing Shocking podcast.
Want to know what's going on in the world of music? Then tune in to the Nothing Shocking podcast, a non-genre based, all ages friendly rock and roll program. Join us weekly for interviews with all your favorite rock stars from the mainstream to the underground. You can find us at nothingshocking.libsyn.com or anywhere you download podcasts.
We're putting the band back together.
The numbers all go to 11.
I'm talking about bands that rock. Led Zeppelin. What about Sabbath? AC/DC. Motorhead.
Does that mean it's louder? Is it any louder?
Well, it's one louder, isn't it?
We're not worthy! We're not worthy!
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
I get up off the ground and raise my head. Days like this, think I should be dead. One for Satan, two for me. Let's cheat the devil, it's fun, don't you agree?
Welcome to the Nothing Shocking podcast. I'm your co-host Jeff Untied, and with me in Dogbowl Studio is
Coach Nez.
You can find the Nothing Shocking podcast on Libsyn or any podcatchers. Like our Facebook page or follow us on X at No Shock Pod.
You can also find the Nothing Shocking podcast on Rock Rage Radio every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Central Time. Our sponsor is Ragged Records, located in downtown Rock Island, Illinois, and downtown Davenport, Iowa. We'd like to thank the Hong Kong Sleepover for allowing us to use their music for our intro and bumper ending. Tonight's guest is
Aaron Nordstrom.
Yeah, of the Gemini Syndrome.
Woyote and Nu Skool.
Yeah, the Gemini Syndrome are hitting the road here in August for I think it was a 4-week tour, I believe. Or something.
Yeah, and they got they've had a couple of singles they've released over the last year and a half or so, and got hopefully a new album here in the near future. We got a couple of announcements here brought to you by Safe Harbor and Ragged Records. Present live music at the Raccoon Motel, Big Brave, Spiritual Poison, and A Seethe on Saturday, August 10th.
Also, Monday, August 12th, National Vinyl Record Day. Get down to Ragged Records in Davenport, Iowa, and check it out. Hey, let's get to the interview.
All right, good night.
Aaron, welcome to the Nothing Shocking podcast. I'd like to introduce to you my co-host, Jeff Untied.
Aaron, thanks for joining us tonight.
Oh, gentlemen, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Well, we're very excited to have you tonight. So let's get right into this. So you're involved with many musical projects, including Gemini Syndrome, Woyote and Nu Skool. With so much going with your musical endeavors, talk a little bit more about, I guess, prioritizing things in the now.
Yeah, it can be tricky. Even just now coming up in the next couple of months, right? I'm going to Belgium for like 5 weeks, and then I come home for about 5 days, and then I'm out to LA to do rehearsals for Nu Skool, and then we're out for 2 weeks, and then I'm home for like a day, and then I'm flying to Chicago for my mom's wedding. I've been lucky in the sense that normally the scheduling just kind of works itself out, to be honest with you. We haven't had too many crazy hiccups. Meigs is in Coal Chamber, so he's got that going on right now intermittently when they've got festivals or tours going on. Brian, our drummer, is out with a large band, kind of working behind the scenes with them, so he's on tour. So like Gemini can't even do anything right now. Right? We've got a record in the can, but we just don't have the ability. We can't tell Meigs not to go play with Coal Chamber. You know what I mean? That would be crazy. So we agree to take a hiatus and kind of put things on the back burner and then approach them when we can. We've got a record and it's awesome. We're super proud of it. I think it's the best work we've done. But with no ability to tour on it, we started releasing a couple songs, and we just kind of had to pump the brakes because we didn't want to just throw away a record, with no support. So it can be challenging, but it's a good time overall. I sometimes wonder if I'm a crazy person for being involved involved in so many things, but here we are.
Very good.
Talk to us a little bit more about, you mentioned Meigs. The other guys in the band, can you expand on how you guys got together?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Meigs, so he joined, after the second record, so record 3 and 4 so far. But he was really around, since the inception of the band. We were all kind of hanging in the same crew in Hollywood. And actually, when I got the Gemini syndrome tattoo on my arm, he was getting tattooed the same night in my apartment. Like, we got tattooed together. So that was like the very formation of Gemini as a band. I had been in LA kind of in between things. It was post OTEP. I had been out of that for a couple of years and was living in Chicago. I had a band with my buddy Brian back in the day, different Brian Wolf. All of my drummers are named Brian. And we had a band called Onome that we were working on, but it was like that recession period of 2008, 2009. Yeah. It was just hard to get anything going, man. And I was in some family stuff was happening, and I was just kind of debating where my path in life was. And I had taken a trip to LA and was kind of more or less praying, like show me which way to go, God, universe, whatever you want to call it, like give me some direction. And I had gone out day drinking, and I went back to my buddy's apartment, took a nap, and woke up to an email from the original guitar player, Rich, we had a mutual friend. They knew I was in town. And he was like, hey, I'm starting a band and I'm looking for a singer, and I heard you're around. And I woke up to that email after having kind of had my little moment of, helplessness. I'm like, what do I do? I get this email on MySpace. I'm like, oh, I couldn't help but think of Orgasmo, if you've ever seen that movie, where he's asking God if he should do these porn movies so he can pay for his wedding in the church. He says, if you don't want me to do it, just give me a sign. And an earthquake happens, and Jesus' statue falls over. He goes, any sign at all. And I just love that scene. So I took that as a sign, and I went and met with Rich and Brian, and we started the band. And shortly thereafter, I moved to LA. We all moved in together into an apartment. We roped in AP and the original guitar player Mike, and the band was formed. And we were rehearsing every day, building up the first show, which we played 6 months later, and then we hit the road, doing small grassroots kind of self-paid for, self-promoted, sometimes playing to hardly anybody kind of tours. And so we built a fan base, and then we started getting some traction nationwide, and we signed a deal and had some member changes, over the years. Rich and Mike both left for different reasons, and the three of us, Brian, AP, and myself, kept going on. We had another couple roster changes of guitar players, just trying to find the right fit. And then Brian was hanging out with Meigs at one point, and they've been friends. They were in a band called Pinata long before Gemini Syndrome. So they've been friends even longer than Meigs and I have. And Meigs was kind of like, what do you guys... You didn't think to ask your old pal? We were like, well, no, because you're Meigs from Cold Chamber or whatever, And he was like, well, that's stupid. I would love to play in your band. And now it's our band. Like, he's an owning member, and the four of us, we're in equal partnership in this whole deal.
Oh, so cool. Nice. Well, you kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier here, but Gemini Syndrome's last album was released in 2021, Third Degree, The Raising. What does the band, I guess, have in store for when the new music is coming out? Are we looking at 2025, or what are we looking at as far as new music?
Yeah, we were hoping it would have been this year. We started releasing even singles last summer. We released Primordial and Wake Up, and we went on a tour at the end of last year. A lot of things kind of came to light in our world of things that we needed to change. So we kind of, again, pumped the brakes. And instead of just continuing to release kind of without a plan or a strategy, we decided to take a step back. And it's unfortunate because that's been like the MO of this band, is we release a record, and then we release another record like 4 years later. And then we release another record like 4 years later.
Yeah.
And none of this was the plan. Between records 1 and 2, we had, those member changes. We had a label change. We do a whole podcast on my experience with the record industry. But then coming out of that into the Third Degree record, like, I was getting sober, which took some time, but then like we were ready to release in 2019, and then the pandemic happened. So we were the weekend that they shut LA down first was the weekend we were going to LA to shoot photos with Dean Carr. And that was the week, like, so the release was supposed to be in April of like 2020, I think. And it didn't end up, we didn't release any songs until like October or December or something of the next year. And that was the official release date. Then it was 21. I don't even think it came out until 22, really. And then this kind of hiccup again. The record's been done since it'll be 2 years in October since I finished vocals.
Oh wow!
This record's been done forever, but we just don't have the path to going forward to release it properly. And life happens, man. Life gets in the way, and you just kind of learn to roll with the punches. And everybody's got personal lives that have things going on, and the industry's ever changing, right? We live in a digital world where social media is king. And if anybody follows me on social media, they know that I'm not the king of social media, right? I suck at it. I don't particularly enjoy it. But it's kind of a necessary evil nowadays. So the game's changed, and we're trying to learn how to evolve with that. I'm not in my 20s anymore. I'm not a kid. I'm doing this a long time, and I have to continually learn and adapt and change to the way that the world is changing and adapting, arguably at a faster pace than ever in human history. So it's a weird place to be an artist and a creative.
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
Hi, Jeff.
Well, just talk a little bit about your songwriting. How much has your songwriting evolved from 2013's The Lux to where you're at now?
Man, it's a different world. I've been writing music since I was a kid. I was in my first band when I was 14, and so I've been writing a long time. The thing that changed when Gemini syndrome became a thing was the access we suddenly had to the pros on the recording end, like working with Kevin Churko and Kane Churko and Matt Good, and I worked with guys like Ulrich Wilde along the way and Matt Hyde, and just all sorts of different. Mikey Doling helped with the first record, right? And just being in rooms with those types of people who have made great records and great hit songs and all that, and helped bands become staple household names. Like there's an art to songwriting, and there's an art to recording those songs in a way that sounds the best they can. And then there's also a differentiation between what the record sounds like and what your live show gives the audience. Because then you have to make choices like, do we run tracks? Are we organic? Are we old school? Are we running all tracks? Do I run vocal harmony tracks since we don't have a backup singer? I don't have money to bring 4 people to do all my harmonies, right? We have to make all those kind of judgment calls. And I feel like we got laser focused in what makes a good song, learning to trim fat from songs, learning to get rid of parts that are unnecessary or cut them in half, right? As an artist, I would always find myself, I think, as a writer, I guess, is like, oh, this riff is awesome. I want to play it for a minute and a half straight, but in the context of a good tune, the listener might get bored from that while I'm up on stage rocking out, So I don't know. There's just so many different ways to look at it, and I'm definitely more comfortable in the room. In all of these years, I've continued studying music, and I teach music on the side when I'm not out on the road, to all different, levels of beginner to advanced, like touring guys and stuff that we work on stuff. So in that whole process, my ease of motion in that world has become greatly increased, right? I'm confident in my knowledge of how music works and what options will always work. Options won't ever work in certain situations. So just with that kind of, I guess it's wisdom in the sense of having been through things and seen the results and tried to learn from those experiences.
Talk to many artists, to solo artists, band member, et cetera, where songwriting, as far as the band goes, one band, they are the songwriter, and they go to if they have another project, they're a collaborative effort into the songwriting. When it comes to Gemini syndrome songwriting, is it a collaborative effort, or do you have a isolated songwriter for the band?
I see. Yeah. So I would say that the Gemini is a collaborative effort through and through. I would say that the riff guys are Meigs and AP, and the structure guys are me and Brian. Right? Like Brian and I will spend more time piecing those things together into a cohesive song. That's not to say that the other guys don't contribute in that area, and that's not to say that I don't sometimes bring riffs. But I think if I had to break down the dynamic, it would be that those guys are the riff writers, and then we're the organizers. And then I pretty much write all the vocals. So I'm principal songwriter on that end. Woyote is a little different, where Woyote is really, and I should say that Gemini usually works with whoever's doing the album, like whether it was Kevin or Kane or Matt, we usually songwrite with those guys too and get their input, and they help us arrange things and maybe suggest new ideas or whatever. With Woyote, the principal songwriters are me and Mikey. Mikey usually goes into the room with Chris Collier, who's producing all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And they'll piece together the music part of it, and then they'll send that to me, and then I'll work on it, and then I'll go in with Chris, and Chris and I will collaborate on the vocals. And then it's pretty much that way. The other guys in Woyote all live in Belgium. Getting them in the room is difficult because of distance, but also Mikey and I are a little older than those cats. We've been doing it a little longer, and we always kind of had this dream or desire to do a project together. And I say this just to point out that there's nothing lacking in ability from those guys. They're all incredibly good players. They're awesome dudes. I love those guys like family as well. But the dynamic that we have with Mikey and I is really efficient, and we're really happy with the way it comes out. So we kind of keep our claws on that. I don't know that it'll always be that way, but that's how it is for right now. And we're only one record deep with that anyway. He called me in the middle of the pandemic saying, "Hey man, I have this band in Belgium with these guys that are connected to his other band, Channel Zero. And we wanted to see if you want to sing." It was a long shot. And I was like, "I'd love to. Let's do it." So he already had a bunch of stuff kind of written, and that was the way it had been created. And then I jumped in, and we wrote some more songs for that record for sure. But it was definitely like the duo of us with Chris kind of guiding the ship.
Very cool. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that, Woyote. Your one album, you mentioned Mother of the Universe. Can you talk a little bit more about maybe some of the songs on that? One of my favorites is Water into Wine.
Yeah. In the last, really my whole adult life, but I spend a lot of time with world religions and traditions, and different philosophers and different modalities of philosophy, right? Exoteric and esoteric combined. And I had been reading a lot about alchemy, and just kind of the myth and story of Jesus and its parallels to other traditions, and what the teachings really were, right? And what is a miracle? And all of that kind of grifted into that songwriting process. I think at the core of any philosophy, you have a unity, and then that unity becomes duality, and we generally refer to that as male and female, and one is an active principle and one is a passive principle. And from the passive principle is born the active principles, right? In Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching, he says the one created the two created the three, and the three created the 10,000 things. So I had been tripping on all of that stuff, and that's really where all of that content came from, right? The mother of the universe being that passive element.
Well, bringing this back to songwriting, Aaron Nordstrom, Gemini Syndrome, and Woyote songwriting for both bands. When you're sitting down and songwriting, do you say, "Hey, I'm going to write Gemini Syndrome music," or am I going to write Woyote music, or does it just kind of fall under the same umbrella and just say, "Hey, this is a great song. It'll work for either band"? Am I making sense?
Yeah, you absolutely. And it's a tough answer. I think that I can't say I don't approach each band with the intention that I'm writing for that band, right? I think musically they both sound different enough Like, what's another way to say this? I don't come to the table with songs already written. It's not like I wrote poems at home and then I'm just trying to plug them into music that these guys wrote, right? Like, I write everything specifically for the music. So there has to be that intent that, yeah, I'm going to be writing this for Woyote, or yeah, I'm going to be writing this for Gemini Syndrome. When it comes to subject matter, that can kind of go either way, right? I mean, I write about what I write about, and it's all really the same stuff. I mean, every song I have is probably can be summed up in my experience of trying to figure out what the F is going on in my life, where I fit in the universe, and why we're all here doing this in the first place. You know what I mean? Like, in a really general sense, it's all kind of like trying to answer those questions. And certain subjects get brought up a lot. There's definitely part of my brain that thinks about Woyote with the paradigm of Viking mentality, because we exist in Belgium. I have Viking ancestry. All of the dudes in the band have Viking ancestry. It's just kind of something we vibe on. There's something that we've kind of tapped into, that Odin mythos, right? So I'm definitely bent that way a little bit going into those songs and writing those tunes. Whereas I probably wouldn't be calling upon that particular tradition in Gemini Syndrome.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Well, that just kind of leads into the Chinese martial arts. I know you're also, a fan of and study the Chinese martial arts. Can you talk a little bit about how you got? When did you get started with that? Was it at a young age, or is that something you just did more recently?
Very young, actually. I started wrestling in junior high. Okay. That got me into kind of combat sports. And then in my early teens, I had one of my mentors, and he was my advocate for the educational board in Illinois. This is kind of tying into the albinism thing. So I had a rough time in school. I was really depressed by the time I became a teenager. I was teased kind of daily. And they were trying to find other alternatives for me going to high school, which culminated in me skipping high school and going to college at the age of 14 or 13. And I eventually dropped out of that to go study Kung Fu, but we'll get into that in a second. So the guy who was my advocate was a sensei in Hapkido. And he taught a brand that he labeled therapeutic martial arts, where we learned the martial arts, we learned the forms, we learned the punches and kicks and stuff, but we weren't like Cobra Kai, right? Yeah. It was more about development and gentleness and just confidence for me at that time. And Jude he was a huge influence on me. Through him, we ended up moving schools to this other place that was kind of a center for troubled youth, where they had kind of run out of options in the state system, right? So Department of Family and Child Services and stuff would send these kids to us. And there was another guy there named Eric, who was a practitioner of Chinese Kung Fu. And then his childhood friend is my Sifu now. He's like my teacher. He was the main guy. He came and visited once. And I had just gotten my black belt in Hapkido, and I got exposed to this Chinese voodoo magic. And I remember sparring with Eric the first time. And he looked at me. He was like, "You're a black belt. I'm a black belt. We should be able to spar, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I learned a valuable lesson in humility that day. Yeah. And I was like, I need to learn. He became one of my closest. I have it tattooed on my calf. He passed away some time ago. So then I moved to California, and I started studying Chinese Kung Fu and all the philosophy that comes along with that. And a little bit of Chinese medicine has sunk its way into it, which eventually all tied back to everything else I study. Everything's a unity. Everything's connected to something else somehow.
Nice. Very good. Well, I know this might sound like a ridiculous question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you feel as though that, the martial arts has helped you balance your musical career and creativity?
Yeah, 100%. It's not a weird question at all. One of my mantras or beliefs is that Kung Fu is life. And really, when you learn it in the traditional Chinese sense of it, it's a philosophy that affects everything you do, right? I'm not a fighter. I'm not a natural athlete. I'm not a violent person by nature. But my passion for studying the fighting and killing arts has changed everything else about my life. The way I deal with interpersonal relationships, the way I deal with business. I have the words breathe and relax tattooed on the inside of my wrists, respectively. Breathe on the left and relax on the right, as that was the first lesson that Eric taught me about anything. If you're going to fight, if you're going to do kung fu, you have to be relaxed, and you can't be relaxed if you're not breathing. And so that teaching alone affects every single thing I do.
Very good.
My buddy and me, he was a black belt. I only made it to about green, but we used to love, anything martial art movies. Do you have from your childhood or anything? Any movie that stands out for you?
I think my all-time favorite is Fist of Legend with Jet Li.
Yeah.
I love that. It's a kind of a remake of the Chinese Connection with Bruce Lee from earlier. But the kung fu in that movie is just phenomenal. And I remember we first saw that when I came. At one point, I moved back to Chicago after I'd studied with my Sifu in California for a couple of years before going back to California. And in that time, we were training like crazy people, right? We were training all the time. We were devouring kung fu movies. And I remember one night, all of us sitting around, and we'd seen Fist of Legend for the first time that night. And my phone dialed my mom in my pocket, and all she heard was us screaming and laughing, and then the sounds of like just madness, right? And she called me back, "So are you okay?" And I'm like, "Yeah, what are you talking about?" I think we may have been experimenting with some smokable drugs at that time in my youth. So we were all stoned too, and look, where's my mom calling me? But she thought we were like in a huge fight. We were just laughing on the couch, but that'll be forever burned in my memory. Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon is a phenomenal film. It's one of my favorites too. And there's a bunch of old school Shaw Brothers movies that are great. I honestly love all the Matrix movies. I love all the kung fu they did in those. Yuen Wu-Ping, especially in the first couple. The first three, was one of the greatest choreographers of that world, right, of all time. So all of that kung fu is phenomenal. What he was able to do with Keanu and the rest of the cast in such a short amount of time, which led Keanu to become a real practitioner of Chinese martial arts and then a bunch of other martial arts too as he's gone on his journey. That guy fascinates me. But I feel like Chinese martial arts changed his perspective on the world too, right? After The Matrix, he became kind of arguably after River Phoenix passed away, he became somebody different. But I think that was the catalyst to lead him into that kind of character development, if you will, of his own person.
Yeah. Well, you're a man of perseverance. You were born with albinism and low vision. You overcame addiction. Talk about the challenges on this journey, and you've now become the success story that you are.
Well, I'm a work in progress, I think. Is success is it ever attained in the worldly sense of the world? We're always chasing something.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, we'll start with the albinism, right? Growing up with that was weird, being different in the Midwest, in a town. There was one other kid with albinism in that town that was my age, and we were friends for some time, but then I moved and we were in different schools or whatever, but virtually isolated with my condition, right? But there's an organization called NOAA, the National Organization of Albinism and Hyperpigmentation, that my mom took me to. When I was quite young, and I met a whole grip of people with albinism. So at the age of 7, right, I saw that all of these people were like me. And I've noticed over the years that there's a lot of people with albinism that don't have experiences like that. There's a lot of people I've met that I was the first person with albinism they'd ever come across. So it's an interesting, circumstance to live with. It caused a lot of problems in my youth. Again, I have to credit my mother with being so proactive about getting me the devices that would help me see better. I still use magnifying glasses for reading, super small print or whatever, just to make my life easier. Mm-hmm. But because of that action, I believe that my eyes developed and developed further than they would have without it. And because of that, I can drive legally. That was one of the goals in my teens that I really wanted. That was kind of what drove me to California in the first place, was to get my independence. I wanted to drive, and I knew that the laws were a little more lenient out there. And they were. And I ended up being able to, I've, still no tickets, no accidents, my whole life. I've traveled across the country numerous times in a car while I was driving. So I can do the gig, is what I'm saying. But just having the support system of my mother really was a huge thing growing up through that. And then it turned into an ally as opposed to an adversary, as opposed to being this curse. It was like, I was able to grow a wizard's beard at the age of 21. So that was pretty sweet. And it's funny, I would say older in my 20s than I do now, just because of the fact that I had like Gandalf hair and beard going on,
Yeah.
The addiction thing, to touch on that, I mean, it's no secret if you do any research on me in my interviews that, I tried all the drugs at some point, almost all of them. I never did heroin or anything because I knew what that did to people. But arguably, I never felt addicted to anything. I was able to try things or experiment with things and then not get hooked in and continue my daily life. And I never lost a job because of anything like that. But then when touring started happening, it snuck up, right? Because every night's a party when you're on the road, especially in the beginning. At least it was for me. You're at a club, you're at a show. We were out with bands that were way bigger than us that I looked up to. We were out with the Five Finger Death Punches and Seven Dusts and Drowning Pools and all that, and I was living my best life, man. And if I had been a little more honest, I could have seen the warning signs first, but I was warned as a kid that I'm adopted. That's another part of my story. And I don't know my birth family, but I was warned as a kid that the rumors had it that my father was a really bad alcoholic and that there was a chance that could run in my genes. And as a kid, I was like, bullshit. No way.
Yeah.
No way. No way I'm a victim to that. And so I just continued on my merry way. But I developed a physical dependency on alcohol, without a doubt, like to the point where I seized out once and my heart stopped when I was trying to detox, when I was trying to quit. And I coded. I died. I had like 5 seizures, I think, in the course of me quitting, because I would relapse. And one of the last ones, the doctor in the hospital was like, you can't try to quit on your own. Your liver has developed a dependency on this that it believes it needs it like oxygen. And there's only 2 drugs you can die from the withdrawals, and that's alcohol and benzos. They don't tell you that in school.
Yeah.
But those are the 2 that'll kill you from the withdrawal. Heroin, you'll want to die. You'll think you're going to die. Meth, you'll want to die. You'll think you're going crazy, but you'll live. But alcohol, will stop your system. And that was a really hard battle. And, in all of that, you say I'm a man of perseverance, I suppose. There was underlying, I think, issues that I never dealt with. I thought I was living my best life, right? I thought I was partying and just having fun. But underneath all of that was a lot of pain from when I was young. Pain from being different, pain from the adoption, pain from my dad passing away when I was 15, pain from bad choices I made, just pain that I hadn't addressed. And it had turned into this almost subconscious lack of desire to live. Not a desire to kill myself, just a desire to cease being. And that was, I think, the catalyst for my behaviors, right? Yeah. That was my way of killing myself, is like, and I kind of did, right? And I was with my Kung Fu teacher, my Sifu. He did CPR, he saved my life. And I think I remember being kind of mad at him at first. Like, fuck, I had finally checked out, and here I am because you saved me, Yeah. But here I am, grateful now 5 years later. I haven't had a drink, and I'm not an AA guy. I'm not a sober guy. I just don't drink. That's my demon, and that's what I need to stay away from. Right?
Yeah.
Everybody's got their things. So, getting through that, I guess the point of all that, to round that out, is that I had to come to a realization that is like Shawshank Redemption, right? Like, get busy living or get busy dying. And I had to change my perspective that I'm here. Like, there's a great Perfect Circle song, right? What's your rush? Everybody has their day to die. I try to remember that over the years when I do and have gotten depressed. Is that, like, you're going to die for sure someday. Like, it's 100% guaranteed.
Yeah.
So, like, just do what you can while you're here with what you got and try to figure it out. I also I've developed a stronger belief in reincarnation and over the years. And if I do have to come back again, I want to do the best job now so I don't have more work to do in the next life.
There you go. Yeah. Well, we talked a little bit about your main gigs, Gemini Syndrome and Woyote, but we've talked to other artists where, you kind of, in today's climate and stuff, you have to have some other projects going on, or you got to be doing something else. Tell us a little bit about Nu Skool. That's a cover tribute band. Is that correct?
Yeah. So it's it's absolutely modeled off of Steel Panther and where they came from with Metal Shop and Metal School in LA back in the day. We were all going to those shows on Monday nights at the Key Club and getting hammered and being crazy. And, they were doing this really fun thing. They were doing music that everybody in the industry liked. And being in LA in particular, I think it gave something to the band people, right, who weren't on tour, who lived in LA, to come all kind of hang out. And they would have guests come up and do their own songs, like Sebastian Bach would come and do Skid Row tunes or whatever. So we thought that was cool. Randy from Stitched Apart, it was his kind of brainchild, and he reached out, asked if I'd be into doing it. And it was one of those things to kind of supplement when we weren't on tour with our other bands. This kind of post-pandemic, the tour, there was a whole year there where you couldn't get any tours because they were all post-dated from pre-pandemic, right?
Yeah.
So it was hard to get anything valid. And then, then there's a bunch of new bands that are now taking the spotlight. So it's just a weird place to traverse. So we were trying to fill in the gaps and do something that was still fun for us, but also, might be lucrative over time and might be able to be a sustainable kind of thing to do in the off season. So that's that. We're going on tour. The School's Out for Summer tour from August 15th to the 30th, I think, maybe the 31st. And see how that goes. Just get our foot in the water. I do features with other artists. Dave Perry from Fear of Water and the band Raw had me do that song Systemic we just released a couple months ago. Went to number 7 on the Billboard charts, which was crazy. It's the highest charting song I've ever had with a band that I'm not in. So that was weird and cool. I've got a couple other features coming out later this year with other people that I'll wait for them to announce so that I don't ruin their strategies or whatever. I teach, like I said, at home via Zoom. I teach all sorts of stuff. I do piano, guitar, and voice lessons, but I also do like music theory and songwriting, lyric writing, give people advice on how to, what to do with your band or whatever, like how to traverse the industry. And that kind of coaching is how I prefer to put it rather than teaching.
That's all.
In that, I've started the last few months, I've been really spending time learning the mix engineering side of things, like learning how to run the desk. I've made a bunch of records now. I've made a bunch of really awesome sounding records, and I have no idea how it was done. So,
Yeah.
and it's and more, more practically, it's expensive. I can't, I'm not trying to sign any more record deals and sign my soul away and be in debt. So how can I continue to make music without having to pay out $100,000 an album, or $50,000 an album, or whatever, So the way to do that is to be self-sufficient. So I have tons of resources, and I have familiarity with the process because I did make those records. I just wasn't pushing the buttons, and part of it was my fear of the visual end, right? The menus in Pro Tools and Logic and all that are super tiny, right? And there's like 1,000 things there I got to read, and that's going to be impossible. So I was just kind of intimidated by it. And for a few years back, right before the pandemic, I started getting into like GarageBand stuff. And I graduated to Logic, and then I graduated to Pro Tools. And so now I'm kind of semi-proficient in the two of them. So I'm starting to get into mixing and mastering people's stuff. One of my students, Shayna, her and her husband have a band in New York, and we started as a vocal coach, and it turned into me kind of helping her chart out songs where she would have a song written vocally but no music to go with it. So she would sing it to me and I would play it on the piano, and then we would figure out chord progressions that would work. And that turned into, well, would you be like, why don't we record this stuff? And so I just finished my first official like mix master of a tune. Sounds pretty good. So I'm looking to get into that as time progresses. I want to start mixing people's albums. I'd love to produce albums for other artists. One of the things that I love about like hanging out with Kane Churko, who's, we've been friends for a long time, but I feel like I'm closer to him recently, is that he doesn't have to tour. He has his own music that he makes and releases. but he gets to write music all the time that does get listened to by a whole bunch of people, even if he's not performing on it. Right? Every In This Moment song has a little bit of Kane in it. Right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And so he gets to have his little dash of influence, and I love that. Like if I could be doing that in the here I tour, and then here I make music with other people and I produce it, and I get to inevitably, put my stamp on it and give my 2 pennies about how it should sound, or maybe where we could go here instead. And, I end up being a co-writer in that regard. And I love that. That's like my favorite thing is probably being in the studio at the end of the day. I really love recording. I can get lost in here for 10, 12, 14 hours and forget to drink anything or pee.
Well, I have one last question for you, and we'll leave you alone for the evening. Chris Collier, you've alluded to the producer, Chris Collier, and he's been on a roll the last, 5, 6, 7 years, producing some great albums. And I listened to Ray Luzier talk about Chris and about what his unique, I guess, hands-on in the studios as far as being a producer goes. Can you talk a little bit about your experience working with Chris and his uniqueness and approach of creating music and albums, putting it all together?
Yeah, absolutely. He's got, first off, he's got a trait that I think is invaluable, and that's he's an instrumentalist. He plays something, and he's a multi-instrumentalist. He's primarily, I want to say, a drummer, but he's a pretty solid guitar player and bass player as well. I think anybody who's coming into the room already with those tools in their toolbox is going to be super useful. Because you never know, like, even if you're a guitar player, he's going to play guitar different than you. And he's going to think about how to create progressions and melodies and accompaniment different. And as long as it's proficient, then that's always good, man. It's always good to have a new flavor and a new perspective to look at your writing process and your songs. But he's just really creative too, right? He's just always got ideas. Him and I love working with Chris, and I think he would say that he loves working with me. He said that to me anyway, so I don't want to put words in his mouth in public, but he says I'm cool in private. He calls me the machine because we go in and we just crank stuff out. He can ask me to do stuff and I can reproduce it on command. And because of that, we end up, kind of experimenting, and it ceases to be work. It becomes fun. He's fearless about it, right? I think a lot of guys don't want to get in the way of the artist as a producer, or some artists don't want the producer to get involved. Yeah. So that's another element of it too. Sometimes a producer might have awesome ideas, but the artist isn't into hearing them, and they're just blowing hot air. Mm-hmm. And inevitably maybe making that relationship worse by stepping on their toes. So Chris is like, I don't know what he's like with other artists, but he knows that we welcome that. So we have great communication when we're in the room, and I'm really looking forward to this next batch of songs with him. And just to say, man, in public, like, how awesome is his rise? Yeah. When we did the first Woyote tunes, like, he had just finished engineering his first Korn record, right? And he had just gotten in the door. He was still the new guy there. And now here he is. He was just over, like they bring him out to Bakersfield to come stay with them and live in their studio while they make records. Mm. So they've really embraced him and seen that. I mean, when I say he's a multi-instrumentalist, like, he's the real deal, man. Like, that guy can play everything really well. And when you got a guy who's trying, the job of the producer is to take what you wrote and hopefully make it even better, right? That's the job. Yes. And so to be offended by that or be like standoffish about it only does you as an artist a disservice. And especially with a guy like him who's so knowledgeable and so creative, like, you'd be silly not to have him stepping in the way and kind of putting his hands on things and taking the guitar and, well, what about this? Try this.
Mm. I really felt as though that his coming out party was the KXM stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
I just thought after that, it was like that was the meteor that took off.
Yes.
Mm. So, but we're out of our allotted time for the evening. Is there anything that we left off tonight that you would like to plug or promote?
Wow. No, man. You guys, great questions. Really enjoyed talking to both of you. I hope I wasn't too long-winded. But here we are. Yeah, it's really, really, really great conversation, and I think you covered everything that I would want to say. I guess if you want to get coaching from me, find me on the old social medias, shoot me a message. If you want me to mix and produce your record, I will. You got to start somewhere.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, this is how things are going to work out. Jeff, the editing ninja over here, will get us all cleaned up, especially my boogers. We'll get them all cleaned up. And
you're good.
Yeah. Cool. Aaron, first of all, it was a great conversation. Thank you so much. Thank you for the correspondence to do this. And just thank you all around. You've been fantastic.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah, happy to be here. I really did enjoy. I've done a million interviews, and some of them don't go this well. So, I had a fucking great time, and great questions, guys. That's always the hardest part. Like, you clearly did your research, and I fucking appreciate that. Big time. Rad, dudes.
All right.
Thanks so much.
Best of luck to you.
Be safe.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Later.
Welcome to the night. You think you know Night Demon? Then the Night Demon Heavy Metal Podcast is for you. Step into the darkness as we peel back the curtain to give you an unprecedented, all-access look into the mind and the heart of the demon. We're talking band history, song analysis, studio anecdotes, stories from the road. It's everything a diehard Night Demon fan could want and more. This is the only place to learn the inside scoop, the deep dive trivia, the untold tales from the band members themselves and those closest to the Night Demon story. Need more? The Sacred Night Demon Crypt will be pried open to reveal demo recordings that have never before seen the light of day, all with in-depth commentary by the band and the people who were there for the writing and recording process. This is a gold mine, a treasure trove of all things Night Demon. Head over to nightdemon.net or wherever you listen to podcasts.